in Horizon 2020 grants. My name is Peter Hertwig. I am a head of unit in the European Commission's Directorate General for Research and Innovation. I have the pleasure to guide you through this webinar today. Why are we doing this? Why do we speak about errors? As you know, the funding in Horizon 2020 is to a large part based on the reimbursement of incurred costs. But we have a set of rules that define the eligibility of these costs. And in particular, in the area of personnel costs, complying with these rules on eligibility can sometimes be complex and tricky because the reality of personnel costs in particular in the different countries, in the different types of organizations is very different and tricky. We know from our ex post audits that most of the errors are not intentional. So they happen because the grantees are not aware of the rules, or they sometimes ignore or have forgotten what is the correct way of doing. So as making errors and then rectifying errors, finding out errors during ex post audits is painful for everybody, for you as the recipients of the funding, but also for us as the funders, and can have sometimes even severe consequences because we will in some cases have to recover money from you, and that will lead to difficulties. Therefore, we think it's best that these errors are avoided in the first place at the outset. And this is the main purpose of today's meeting. We will go through the rules of, in particular, charging personnel costs in our Horizon 2020 grants. And we will then have a lot of time for answering to your questions and trying to clarify as much as possible these rules on the eligibility. Before we go into these questions and answer sessions, we will have two relatively short presentations. The first presentation will be given by my colleague David Mechutu from our legal unit, and the second one by Sorin Charban from the audit unit. The first one will explain the rules. The second one will give you hints on the actual findings of audits on the most frequent sources of errors. And as I said, after these presentations, we will have a questions and answer session. This session will be run via Slido. So if in parallel to watching the YouTube stream, you can go to slido.com and key in the key for today, which is costs 2020, all together in one word, costs 2020. Then you can start immediately to put your questions. I would ask you not only to encode your questions there, but also to look at questions of others. And if you see that you are also interested in the same questions or a very similar question, you don't repeat coding in this question, but you vote on the question of the other one. And we will then go through the list of questions in the order of number of votes so that we can at least in the remaining time reply to the most popular questions that were asked to us. So with this, I think I can stop my introduction and we will go into the first presentation. I should, as a final remark, say that these two presentations are not live. They are recorded videos, but of course the question and answer session at the end will be live with speakers or representatives of the units live and with us and trying to answer your questions. So please start the first presentation.
Well, good morning. We are broadcasting from Brussels, as you have realized. My role today is to speak about the personnel costs in Horizon 2020. It is not today's intention to go through every single small little item of the personnel cost. That will take us probably more than the triple of the time that Manuel have indicated. but to concentrate really on the main aspects to avoid that you may fall into errors when preparing your cost declarations for Horizon 2020. Actually, this morning I was updating my paper copy, can you imagine? My paper copy of the annotated model grant agreement. If you don't know why it is, don't worry, we will speak more about it in a few minutes. And I have realized that the explanations for the personal cost take something like about 30 pages in the annotated model grant agreement. You may say that is a lot. But if you compare it with the 300 and nearly 80 pages that the full explanations on the Horizon 2020 grant agreement takes within this annotated model grant agreement, and if you think that probably around 3/4 of the cost and nearly as much of the errors in Horizon 2020 grants are concentrated into the personal cost, probably these 30 pages, even if it take a while to read them through, are not that big and not that much of an effort. But in any case, today, as I was saying, I'm going to concentrate on the typical issues that might raise mistakes when you are preparing your cost declarations concerning personal costs in Horizon 2020. Let's see if we do it right. First indication. Well, if you are today or in a near future connected to this webinar or refreshing your memories of it, it's probably because you have an Horizon 2020 grant agreement ongoing. Well, the Horizon 2020 program, as you can see in the slide, ran it from 2014 until 2020. But it doesn't mean that it's over. That was the time when the program finished. But we still have grant agreements to sign, and for the next year, you will be implementing the grant agreements that you have signed until the end of the program. The message now is that remember that whatever we are going to explain today to you about Horizon 2020 does not apply to Horizon Europe. As Emmanuel explained it, you already have available some other presentations about Horizon Europe, and very soon we will concentrate on explaining what are the cost conditions, the reporting obligations, etc., of Horizon Europe in a wave of other webinars. Today is Horizon 2020, and also if incidentally you still have alive any FP7 program, the same logic applies. So what I'm going to tell you today about personal costs does not concern FP7, does not concern Horizon Europe, it's only Horizon 2020. And even within Horizon 2020, I must say that I'm not covering everything of it, because we are going to be focusing these explanations on personal costs in cost reimbursement grant agreements. So where you have to calculate your actual costs in accordance to the rules of the grant agreement. You may know that we have other types of grants, like the lump sum grants, which is just a fixed amount. So there you don't have to calculate how to declare your costs during the reporting, or like the Maria Sklodowska-Curie action grants, where it's a unit cost, it's a fixed amount that becomes already determined in the grant agreement, and you just use that fixed amount. So there are no complications and there are no these financial mistakes. That's the reason why today we are only working concentrated on the personal cost in cost reimbursement grants. So the first element about personal cost is, well, who can I declare as personal costs in my cost declarations for Horizon 2020 grant agreements? Well, I think that the first indent is the most logic. Of course, your employees are your personal costs. There are no doubts there. Employees, by the way, also means if you are attending this webinar from a public entity, when we say employees, it also means public servants, civil servants, sorry. So these two categories are automatically included in the personal cost. But you can also declare as your personal cost seconded staff. For instance, if a professor comes from a different university to work for you, if you are a university into the project, you can also declare the cost of this person as your personal cost, even if you don't pay directly this person. On top of it, if you are an SME, a small and medium-sized enterprise, and if the SME owner is participating in the project, but is not an employee of the SME, so that he or she does not have a salary from the SME. You can also declare the cost of these persons as your personal cost. And finally, but this is subject to conditions, you might also be able to declare as your personal cost the cost of other persons that work for you, but that are not your employees. This is the case, for example, of some types of consultants. We'll have a few words more on this in the next slides. And this is personal cost in Horizon 2020. You may think that it's horribly complex. It is, in any case, quite a dense tree of options. That's true. The reason for it is that we have had to adequate the Horizon 2020 grant agreement to the many different options and situations that take place around Europe. So the biggest difficulty when calculating your personal cost in Horizon 2020 is probably to find your way within this tree of different options. To simplify this task, we have already marked there for you what we consider to be the easiest way to calculate them. It doesn't mean that you must go down that line. You may take the other options. You will see a bit more of information about these different options in the next slides, but I will, through the other slides, all the time address you to what we consider and has proven to be the less error-prone of the options within this tree to calculate the personal cost. So don't be scared. It might look difficult, but it's because you are looking at every single possible way that you may have to calculate personal cost. And at the basis, it's extremely simple. The logic that you can easily follow is that the personal costs in Horizon 2020 are calculated simply by multiply the number of hours that the person worked in the project, in the Horizon 2020 action. And for this, you need time records. I'm going to insist several times on this, by an hourly rate, so X euros per hour. And you don't need to invent a formula for the hourly rate. It also comes within the grant agreement. So when you sign the grant agreement, in the text of the grant agreement, the explanations about how to calculate this hourly rate are already there, clearly detailed. And beyond that, you also have the detailed explanations, developments, and examples about this calculation in the annotated model grant agreement. I will keep on repeating this annotated model grant agreement several times. I will give you the link at the end in case that you don't know it. So hours worked in the project multiplied by an hourly rate. Keep this in your mind because we are going to now explain in a bit more of detail these two elements. The first, hours worked in the project. Horizon 2020, you need timesheets. You need timesheets, you need timesheets. Keep this in mind. We will keep it repeating. It slightly changes in Horizon Europe, but as you have already understand by now, Horizon Europe is going to be a different story. We'll have separate presentations, we'll have different grant agreements, so it does not concern today our presentation. Horizon 2020, you need time records. There is one exception for persons working exclusively in the action. You can read about that in the annotated grant agreement. By default, keep in mind timesheets. And you don't need to record all the hours. You just need to record the hours that the person works in the Horizon 2020 action. So it's not that we are imposing you something beyond what is necessary to calculate the personal cost. And there, in your timesheets, you cannot declare budgeted time. So it's irrelevant if at the beginning you estimated that the person will work 3 months in the project and eventually you needed 6. You cannot declare the budgeted time. You must declare the reality of the time worked in the action. Similarly, you cannot declare estimated time. So it's not about at the end of the year, well, I think that the person worked 500 hours in the project and I declare these 500 hours. It does not work like that. You cannot declare estimated time. And you cannot declare either, and this happens in some specific contracts, a percentage of the time of the person. So it's not enough to say, well, in the contract of this person, the employment contract, we have put that the person will work 25% of the time in this grant agreement. It's not enough. You need to declare, record, and declare systematically the reality of the time that the person worked in the Horizon 2020 actions. So, once again, and for the last time now, remember that you need, in Horizon 2020, timesheets for the hours declared to the grant. So the other side of the formula is the hourly rate. Now that we know how many hours the person has worked in the action, we need to determine the hourly rate. And it is the grant agreement who tell us, well, you will calculate the hourly rate by simply dividing the personal cost of the person by the number of productive hours. What you can put in the personal cost you're looking at on the slide is the real salary of the person, the social security contribution, taxes, and other costs that are included in the remuneration of the person that arise from national law or the employment contract. Okay? Be very careful about things like gifts or bonuses that are given not based on objective conditions, premiums, that might be delicate and in many cases might not be eligible. So keep in mind that these are the elements that you can put within the calculation of the hourly rate in the personal cost. Then we need to divide this personal cost by the number of productive hours. And you remember the tree with all the options? Well, there are 3 options for the number of productive hours. The first option, the one that we recommend, the simplest, the less risky, is 1720, so 1,720 hours per year. It doesn't matter in reality if the person actually works more hours in total than the 1720 or less hours than the 1720 in total. You can always use 1720. If the person works part-time, you will do a pro rata corresponding to the part-time. If the person is employed just for 6 months, it's going to be just half of this 1720, so also a pro rata of this 1720. But any beneficiary, any one of you can use the 1720 hours to calculate the hourly rate of the person to charge the cost to the Horizon 2020 grant agreements. It might be possible that you don't like it, for instance, because you already have your own methods to calculate annual productive hours. You're a big company or a big institution, and you have cost accounts, and you yourself said, well, yeah, I'm already doing this my way, and want to keep this system. For that is the standard. You see this option that is in your left bottom corner of the slide. And you also can calculate it person per person, taking into account the number of hours that the individual person worked during the year. We put these 2 options there, are also open. They are subject to conditions. If you don't like or you prefer not to use the 1720, please check carefully how and under what conditions you can use one of the other 2 options. Then, the next question is, now I know that I have to multiply the number of hours by an hourly rate. And how many times do I have to do this? How many times do I have to calculate an hourly rate? Well, the main, again, branches in our tree, the main option and the one that is the simplest, and because it is the simplest and the less risky we recommend, is do it once in each financial year. So just once at the end of each financial year, you calculate your hourly rate by dividing the annual personal cost by the annual productive hours. That's very simple. Normally, you have already these global amounts because of your statutory accounts or because of the tax declaration, so it's very easy. Now, if you want, there is a small downside on this main approach, that is that when at the end of the reporting period, the financial year is still ongoing. For instance, your financial year ends in December and the reporting period ends in March, the year after. You will have to use for these last months, these months of the ongoing financial year, the hourly rate of the previous full financial year, your last closed financial year. So you will not be able to calculate hourly rates for fraction of a year, which implies that if there is a salary increase at that moment, well, it's not going to be reflected immediately in the hourly rate. It's going to be for the next reporting period when you will see this hourly rate updated, if you want. Well, there are cases in which beneficiaries told us, well, look, this is not my normal way. I want another option, or I'm not happy with this because, okay, the ongoing financial year in your example is 3 months, but it might be 11 months. And if there is a significant increase in the salary, well, we will be able to recuperate more EU funding if we will have different approaches. For instance, this second option that we have allowed now in the Horizon 2020 grant agreements, that is to calculate the hourly rate per month. So rather than doing for each person an hourly rate at the end of the year, you will do 12 hourly rates, one in each month, by dividing the monthly personal cost by the monthly productive hours. If you go down the line, if you would say, well, I indeed prefer, I don't care, it doesn't matter for me all this additional administrative work because of the monthly calculations, I insist 12 rather than one in a year, I want to go down the line. Again, please check carefully in the annotated model grant agreement the explanations for this monthly hourly rate, because there are some specific conditions that make the calculations in some cases slightly more difficult than the the calculation based on the full financial year, so more prone to errors. The option is there. We recommend you going to the annual because it's simpler, it's simpler, and it implies less administrative burden. But if you want to check the other, if you want to see how it works, the information is available in the annotated model grant agreement. Now, there are two ceilings that apply to your personal cost declarations. In reality, the two ceilings are based on the principle that the grant agreement, the grant itself, can never result in a profit for you. So we are covering costs, right? So if you are making a profit, we are going beyond what has been your actual cost. That would not be possible. To ensure that we respect this general rule of not making any profit out of the grant, there are a double ceiling on your personal cost declaration. The first side of the ceiling is that you can never declare in a year, in total, in all EU grants together, more hours than the number of hours that you have used to calculate the hourly rate, so the number of the annual productive hours. So if I took option 1, 1720, and I calculated my hourly rate based on these 1720 hours, I can never declare in EU grants in a year, in total, for that person, more than 1720. Even if in reality, for whatever reason, the person working more hours. It is irrelevant, because when you divide by 1720 and multiply by 1720 again, it implies that you have already charged the full personal cost of this person in that year to EU grants. That's the reason why, even if the person works more hours, you have to stop declaring them to EU grants. And immediately related to this, we also have the second condition that says that the total of the personal costs declared for reimbursement as actual costs in EU and Eurotown grants in a year cannot be higher than the total personal cost for this person in your accounts. So it's the same logic. You cannot make a profit, you can never declare more than the total of the personal cost of the person. After that, you may say, well, still it looks rather complex, and there is a lot of math to make these calculations, and there are the ceilings and the options, and I'm a bit scared of making mistakes and having to pay back later on. That's dangerous. Well, what we have done to help you in that situation, or for instance, it also happens that you are just a one-time participation in Horizon 2020, and you are worried that you might be missing some elements. We have prepared a wizard, so an IT tool to support the calculations that verifies automatically this double ceiling and helps you through your choices. You have there the entry point to this wizard tool, which is available at the time of your reporting, so the financial reports, okay? You see there this magic one which will give you the access to the wizard, which is not mandatory. You may use it, you may not use it, it's your choice. Eh? It's available for you. We have done it to help you with the calculations and all the conditions, but if you prefer to do it yourself on your way, on your own, not on your way, the way is the one in the grant agreement, that's fine. But if you want, the possibility is there. Now, to wrap up my part of the presentation today, we are going to tackle a few special cases with a couple of key messages. So let's imagine that you are in a situation. Here we have two persons. One is representing our side, one is representing your side. And you say, well, look, I want to pay more to my employees than the normal salary when they work in this prestigious grant. Our reply will be, well, if the only moment in which, and the only occasion in which you do that is when participating in Horizon 2020 or even in European Union grants, we cannot accept it because we want to contribute to your cause in the normal way that you do it. So paying the normal remuneration, participating to your normal policies, travels, etc. So if it is just for us, it's not possible. Okay, we will just cover up to the normal basic salary. It can be, however, that you reply, but the thing is that I always do this when it is a prestigious grant. So my internal rules go into saying that when there is an important prestigious grant, we will pay more to the person. Well then, and this is the message, it might be possible. We call this project-based remuneration, but there are specific rules that you need to apply. And if there is something that we unfortunately have to recognize that is somehow complex about Horizon 2020, is this project-based remuneration. So don't be surprised, don't be scared, but if you are in this situation, here really I must insist that you check very carefully what are the explanations in the annotated model grant agreement, and remember that you can always contact us. I'll tell you how in a couple of slides in case of doubts. Two other specific cases. Remember that I explained to you that it was possible to declare as personal cost the cost of the SME owner, so the owner of an SME who is the beneficiary, the SME the beneficiary in the grant agreement. If this owner is not an employee, in some countries it's not possible to be an employee of your own company. So if this owner is not employee but participates in the grant agreement, so works directly in the grant agreement, in the action, in the project itself, we accept that the time of this SME owner is valorized and can be charged to the Horizon 2020 action via what we call a unit cost, which actually is an hourly rate that is fixed by the Commission and that will appear directly in your grant agreement. The difference, I insist, is if it is an employee, it follows the same logic that all the other employees. If it is an SME that is an SME owner that is not an employee, then you have this unit cost, even if the person is paid by any other means, including service contracts or whatever non-employment contracts. In those situations, it's always the SME owner unit cost that applies. And finally, the last special case that I wanted to name here is the case of consultants. Remember that, as said in the second slide, that in many cases, or in some cases, you can also charge as your personal cost people who works in the project but are not your employees. They are working to you via other type of contracts, a service contract typically, or any other type of labor contract, but not employment one. Well, this is possible, but it's not always, and it's not systematic. It's not because you hire a consultant on personal basis that you can declare the cost of the person as your personal cost. So here, please check the Article 6282 and the explanations in the annotated model grant agreement, because even if very often they can still be declared as personal costs, there are some cases and some circumstances under which you will have to declare them as subcontractors, worst scenario, or purchase of services. So if you have this type of consultants, be careful, check it carefully, do it right from the beginning. Don't wait for an auditor to correct you and recover the money. So this is going to be my last slide, and it is about where you can find more information about everything that I have explained and many more issues that today we didn't have the time to get into details. First message, you have heard me speaking several times about this Horizon 2020 annotated grant agreement. This is really the book where everything is explained. Whenever we have questions, we use exactly this information to reply to your questions. So same document for you, same document for us. It's full of examples, detailed explanations, and it also contains the articles, so the parts of the grant agreement to which the explanations refer. It is available through the portal, and you have a direct link here in the slide. more in detail if you want to go into details about the practical implementation, the procedures, etc. So beyond the legal provisions of the grant agreement, you have the Horizon 2020 online manual, also available through the portal, and here with the link that is in the slide. And it might be perfectly possible that after reading, it's still not clear one element or another aspect, and you want more information. It also happens to me. In that case, you can first of all contact your national contact points. These are people who is specifically dedicated in your country to reply to questions about Horizon 2020. They know your language, they speak your language, they know your particularities, and they are particularly knowledgeable about certain aspects of Horizon 2020. Your national contact points, the contact details are available also in the portal. So through this link also, and at the end, you have also the possibility to contact us directly, the Commission directly, via the Research Inquiry Service, where you can submit your question, your specific question is going to get arriving to me, my colleagues, sorry, depending of the area to which the question refers, and you will get a written answer by email directly from the Commission. And this is it. I stop here with this part of the presentation. I will pass the floor now to my colleague Soren, who will speak about the audit dimension of Horizon 2020, and we will have plenty of time at the end to reply to your questions. Thank you very much. See you later.
I hope you can hear me. I will quickly present to you the audit perspective, let's say, for Horizon 2020 grants. What we see in practice and so on. But first of all, we'll go to some introduction and speak about the errors. What do they occur? Why do they occur? Of course, misunderstanding of the rules. That's the part where David kindly presented to you the bigger tickets. And then, of course, lack of attention to the detail of the provisions of the grant agreements. And there, I really recommend you to go through the annotated grant agreement, read carefully, and really pay attention to the details or to the specificities you are looking for, because there are many guidelines included. And of course, intentionality as well, that can explain why some errors can occur. The consequences of error are, of course, negative ones for beneficiaries. This can be the non-optimal use of funding available, and this may lead as well to recoveries, of course. Not only for beneficiaries, for the European Commission services as well, the scrutiny that the European Court of Auditors can scrutinize the budgetary authority in charge of the Horizon 2020 actions. There could be an increased error rate as well, of course, an increased ex post audit efforts to detect such errors, and eventual corrective measures that may be applied. So this in a nutshell to speak about the consequences of errors and why we would like to avoid them, of course. Now, quickly, just to give you an idea about how the error rate is calculated, basically, from the audits that we are performing, from the population of paid Horizon 2020 grants, we are taking a sample and we calculate an error rate based on a simple calculation. Basically, we are summing up the negative adjustments from the audit, and we are dividing this by the sum of the audited amounts. The assurance elements of the audit, the main purpose of an audit is to provide assurance. Now, the assurance elements are used to assess the legality and regularity of Horizon 2020 project payments, and to also calculate a so-called residual error rate. Basically, the residual error rate is the, let's say, remaining error not detected within the audit. And the point that the objective is to keep this residual error rate at an acceptable level. The general control objective of the control strategy is to get the residual error rate as close as possible to 2%, without necessarily expecting it to get under 2%, of course. The main detected errors, so now we're trying to, I will present to you in the slides the main detected errors during the audits that we carried out for Horizon 2020 actions are for personal cost especially. They are due to mainly first of all, incorrect productive hours calculation. Basically, I think we have a slide later on about this. But this is referring basically to the three options to calculate productive hours and to the correct application, especially of the second option and third one, meaning the individual productive hours or the standard productive hours, which have some conditions to respect. So therefore, either the conditions are not entirely respected or the errors refer especially to these conditions to be respected. The option one, obviously, it could be used, so we have less errors there. Regarding remuneration cost, we may have incorrect remuneration cost, like, for example, estimated cost or budgeted cost, which may indeed explain some of the errors in personnel cost. The other part is incorrect time working on the action claimed. Obviously, this is linked directly with the timesheets. And of course, all the elements explained by David, my colleague David, earlier about the timesheet should obviously be taken into account, because this may lead to errors if this is not the case. And of course, unreliable or missing timesheets, this may lead to rejection of cost or to calculation of adjustments by the auditors. Just to make sure that the personal cost is correct, so how to tackle these errors? For the personal cost calculation, the method to calculate personal cost is to multiply the hours worked coming from the timesheets with the total of personal cost, basically basic salary, social security contributions, and add-ons, to the total productive hours obtained by using the options explained earlier, 1, 2, and 3, basically fixed number of hours, individual productive hours, or standard productive hours. This second part of the equation is called the hourly rate, and basically for the personal cost, or for the upper part, we would advise to make sure that the time recording system, this is for the, first of all, sorry, for the number of hours, some advices from an audit perspective. So we will advise you to make sure that the time recording system is consistent with the human resources records, probably dated and signed, not in excess of your full-time employment, and this has to do, of course, with double sealing, with the respect of double sealing, explained earlier by my colleague, and of course to have sufficient, to have the time recording sufficient in terms of information. And here you have, of course, the necessary information in the annotated grant agreement with the minimum conditions that could be included in the timesheets. For the numerator part now, for the personal cost that you can include to calculate the hourly rate, the eligible personal cost may include, as I was saying earlier as well, the brute salaries, the gross salaries, the social security contributions, the employers and employees contribution. So obviously the employees contribution is included in the gross salary. I will not enter into these details, but both of them are eligible. And taxes and other costs included in the remuneration if they arise from national law or employment contract. So these are the eligibility rules. Now, what they should not include is any ineligible item. There is a specific article, namely 6.5, which details all these ineligible items, majority of them. And any cost included in other budget cost category, obviously like indirect cost or subcontracting or travel cost, etc., should not be included again in personnel costs. So I think this is very obvious. For the denominator, so for the down part of the equation to calculate the hourly rate, the advice, as my colleague said as well, is to really use the option 1,720 hours. This has the less, let's say, has, let's say, the less possibility to make errors. Yeah, it's one fixed amount, you can use it, and the possibility to make errors is lower. Now, if you can use this option, if the employment contract does not specify the working time, or conditions, or if the annual workable hours cannot be determined also. So you may have some specificities here. If you have those specificities, you may use also this option in addition. For individual annual productive hours, so this is this option 2 to calculate productive hours, basically the formula should be used, the formula which is well explained in the annotated grant agreement. So to calculate this annual individual productive hours by first calculating the annual workable hours and deducting, of course, absences and adding also overtime. For the standard annual productive hours, this should be, so here we have conditions obviously for option 2 and 3. We don't have all the conditions on the slide, but basically, please, if there are specificities to pay attention to, are those conditions where we can use this. For example, individual and productive hours cannot be used in certain conditions and in certain circumstances and so on. For standard annual productive hours, this should be, that's one of the conditions, according to the beneficiary's usual cost accounting practices. And of course, the minimum threshold of 90% should be respected, meaning the annual productive hours are at least 90% of the standard annual workable hours. Basically, by taking out the absences and overtime, this will not be more than 10%. Now, some further advices on how to avoid errors. You can make sure that the time charged to the project is correct. Basically, all the hours that you use to calculate the personnel cost are exactly the same as what you have in your timesheets or in the time recording system, if it's an IT one. You may be amazed, we still find many differences in the time charged in audits. Time records, the second advice is that time records that you use meet the grant agreement's conditions. Basically, you have the name of the person working, the signature of the person, signature of the supervisor, etc. The number of hours, obviously, very important, worked on the project. And in the remuneration, the numerator is correct. As explained earlier, you do not include ineligible items. You only include those elements that come from the labor agreement, etc., labor contract. And then for the down part of the calculation, productive hours in the denominator are correct, meaning either you use simply option 1 and then there is nothing else to check further, or if you use option 2 or 3, you will make sure that the conditions to use these options are fulfilled. Furthermore, personal cost formula reconciles, meaning there are no arithmetical errors still in the formulas. This may happen, this still happens, although with using IT tools, this is less and less the case, but we may still find errors there. And that transaction listing reconciles. Here, given the fact that often beneficiaries are taking extracts, what we call breakdown of cost, extracts of cost from the accounting system or project accounting system to declare this in the financial statements for Horizon 2020, there could be, let's say, some rows that are not taken properly or errors still that may happen there. Employment contracts are in place for employees, obviously. For the other type of personnel, we're not talking here because we are more focusing on personnel costs, but basically for employment contracts, if you are declaring personnel cost as for employees, you should make sure that the employment contracts are in place, of course. Also for the audit, and this you will receive anyway a list of documents to prepare for the audit in advance. And one last part, basically here exchange rate, to ensure that the exchange rate is stipulated by the Horizon 2020 grant agreement is calculated, because you have to use a specific exchange rate. Of course, before you press the button, you do all these final checks. Now, this is only several hints and advices from an auditor's point of view. Of course, there are many more details that we see but this is to only give you an idea about what are the main elements you can do in order to avoid errors. Some additional info, some of them have already been indicated by my colleague in the previous presentation, but basically we have the Horizon 2020 Indicative Audit Program, where you can go and see what are the main checks, the indicative checks that could be done in case of an audit. So there you can also test for your own situations or specific situations, or for the checks that you could do already at your level. Of course, Horizon 2020 online manual, we have a section, a specific section for audit and certifications. Inside, of course, the online manual itself. And the same as in the previous presentation, national contact points or research inquiry service for any other further questions. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you for the presentations. And as indicated, we now have quite some time to go through your questions. We see in Slido that there are already quite a number. I see at the moment 39 questions, and many of them are also upvoted, so we can go through them in the order of number of votes. For the ones who have not yet asked questions or didn't find yet the way to do it, I repeat, the interaction is via Slido, www.slido.com. And the key for today is costs 2020. You can see all the questions that were already asked. You can vote on them, but you can, of course, also encode your own questions if your issue is not yet covered by the existing questions. With this, I suggest we start. And I recommend a new phase in the webinar today. So the first presentation was given by David Mejuto from the legal unit, but for replying to your questions, we have another colleague from the legal unit with us today. So welcome to Isabelle Leroy, who will help us in replying to your questions. I start with the first one. If the most popular one, if hours worked are recorded in an electronic system, do we need to also produce timesheets? I think the answer is it depends, but how it depends, I think Isabelle might give you more details. Isabelle, please.
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be with you to try to answer your question this morning. So if you have an electronic system to record the time worked, there are some conditions for the electronic system to be considered as reliable, and that's notably that there has to be an electronic signature with a link with a validation to the identity of the person with a password. Also that have to be secured user rights, and also an auditable log of the electronic transactions. And if these conditions are fulfilled, the electronic system can be considered as reliable for the timesheets, and the conditions are explained more in details in the annotated model grant agreement under the Article 18 for those who want to really look in the technical details.
Thank you very much. And we go to the next question. Should I reduce fixed productive hours, 1720, for the hours when the person was sick, refunded hours, question mark?
So if you're using the option 1 for your annual productive hours, which is the fixed number 1720 hours per year, you should not deduce anything for sick leave. The only thing that you would deduce is parental leave, but any other type of leave is not deducted, so you leave it at 1720 for a full-time employee for 1 year.
Thank you. Next question. A researcher paid by his university travels from my institute's project. I do not report his personnel costs, but travels. Does he have to do the timesheets?
Well, when you are traveling, to the extent that it is possible to work and in compliance with your labor law, and that you have timesheets to recognize that, to certify that you have been working during some of the traveling time, not, for example, when you were attending a meeting, but when you were for example, traveling or during the air transport, for instance, this time can be considered as working time according to the timesheet.
Maybe there is a slight aspect in this question. I understand it in a way that this researcher is not employed or paid by the organization charging the costs, but the researcher travels. So
Okay,
I think, yeah.
Indeed. So there, concerning travel, there is a possibility for the expert to have the cost for travel declared, but there are some conditions, like notably the expert should be mentioned in the description of the action in Annex 1. However, concerning personal costs, that's something different. If it's an employee, of course, you will use the calculation of the personal cost for an employee. If it's not someone with which you have any employment contract or any other type of contract, then it cannot be under personal cost. It would have to be one of the cases that my colleague listed in the presentation, either an employee or somebody seconded to you, or somebody with a direct contract with the beneficiary, or for example, an SME owner, but one of the categories for the personal cost. If there is no possibility to be under one of these categories, you cannot declare personal costs.
And I think the question relating to the timesheets is in the sense that timesheets are needed if you charge personnel costs. If
Absolutely.
your organization does not charge personnel costs, you don't need timesheets. Next one, how is the person month calculated for an employee with full-time, half-time and part-time effort?
So person month, we have to clarify from the start that it's not a notion that you use to declare personal costs. So for what we have been talking this morning on how to report your personal cost, person month does not take place here. Person month is a notion that you use to report technically on the effort that you have done in the action. And so in your technical report, you have to report on the effort done, and this is in the form of person month. And for this, we are not prescribing the methodology to calculate your personal month, and that's according to your usual practices.
But maybe, Isabelle, you can extend understanding the question in the sense, how is the charging of personnel costs done for such persons who work part-time?
So for persons who would be working part-time, and then now we are talking about how to report your personal costs, the main aspect that you have to take into consideration is the number of annual productive hours that you are going to use in your calculation of the hourly rate. And if I take, for instance, the case where you are using the option 1 of the fixed number of annual productive hours, which is 1,720 hours per year, you would do a pro rata according to the working time, working pattern that is fixed in the employment contract of the person. So for a person who is working 50% according to his employment contract, you would apply the 50% pro rata to the number 1,720, so divide it by 2, and that would be the number that you would use to determine your hourly rate. And then, of course, to multiply your hourly rate by the number of hours worked on the action. It's only the hours actually worked on the action and as reflected in the reliable timesheets.
Next questions, are paid holidays considered as days worked on the project?
So concerning the part of the calculation, which is the number of hours worked on the action, it's only hours really worked on the action. So the timesheets must reflect the time that was really worked on the action. So that time spent on a holiday cannot be taken into consideration. As for the part of the hourly rate, then it's depending on the option that you chose for the annual productive hours, and notably if you use option 1, which is the fixed number 1,720, this does not it's fixed, so it doesn't change according to the number of holidays.
Okay, next question. Which template to use for the timesheets? How detailed must this be? We have a very clear answer to this.
So we provide, but as just a help and not in a compulsory manner, a template in the annotated model grant agreement. So if you have your own timesheet system, you may use it, but you can use a template if you don't have any. But in any case, the timesheet must fulfill a number of minimum requirements, which are listed in the annotated model grant agreement under Article 18. And among these minimum requirements for any timesheet that you're using for Horizon 2020, there is the indication of the project number, the acronym, the name of the beneficiary, the name of the person, the employee, the person working, and the supervisor, the date of the signature, which must be at least monthly, and then of course the number of hours worked on the action and per worked package. I think that's the main requirements, but the full list is in the annotated model grant agreement under the Article 18.
Okay, next one. Are personnel costs related to maternity, paternity leaves eligible, the share of the legal costs to be paid by the institution and not the Social Security?
So we contribute in a certain manner to the cost of parental leave, but it's we have to explain how we do that. So first of all, if you have costs as a beneficiary during a maternity leave or parental leave, it's only the costs which are actually incurred by the beneficiary that could be taken into consideration. So that's costs. So, for example, part of the salary that you would have paid during the parental leave and would be mandatory and according to national law or a collective labor agreement or the employment contract. And that is that remains on the beneficiary, which means that is not reimbursed by some local or public authority. And then that's for the amount of personal costs that you could be charging. But then for the calculation of the hourly rate, we also take into consideration the time that was spent on parental leave in the number of hours for the annual productive hours, if you calculate your hourly rate on a yearly basis. So in that case, for example, if you are using the number of annual productive hours, which is fixed 1,720 hours, you could deduct from this number the time spent on parental leave. If you are differently, if you are using an hourly rate calculated on a monthly basis, then it's not the time spent on parental leave is not deducted from the number of hours, the monthly monthly productive hours. But it's a different calculation, which is a bit, I would say, more complex, where you have to calculate on top of your personal costs an amount corresponding to the proportion of the cost that you paid for the parental leave compared to the time the person worked during that year. So it's a different calculation that is a bit more tricky, but we do in both cases contribute in a way.
Okay, we go to the next one. If a person has been hired for the months of a period after the last financial year, can we use an hourly rate based on these few months?
Just would like to read the question again. If a person was hired for the months of a period after the last financial year, can we use an hourly rate based on these few months? So I understand that it's not after, because I had the doubt whether it was after the end of the project, but I understand it's during the duration of the project, and it's a reporting period that would understand overlaps on the beginning of a financial year, which will not be closed at the moment of reporting. So in that case, if your financial year is not closed, and I will take an example, if the financial, if the reporting period would be closing, let's say in March 2023, and your financial year goes from 1st of January to end of December, then in March you would not the financial year will not be closed. So you cannot use these 3 first months of January, February, March to calculate the hourly rate. You have to use the hourly rate that you calculated for the last closed financial year. And in my example, where we were talking about March 2023, your last closed financial year would be 2022.
Isabelle, if I can,
yes, please.
If I can quickly intervene here. So I think the question also refers to the situation, so just as a complement to the situation where the person in this example that you gave, the person is hired, let's say in February, and works the months of February and March 2023, in which case the question asks whether which costs should be taken into account for the calculation of this cost. There is a specific case foreseen in the annotated grant agreement, which says that for persons hired during the period, the actual cost incurred should be taken into account for the calculation of the cost of this person. Thank you.
Absolutely, you're right. If it's hired after in the new year, you have to do it differently. You're absolutely right.
Next question, could we have a demo of the wizard option? So I'm afraid we cannot at that short notice organize a full demo of this wizard, but what we have is a guidance document which is also accessible via the annotated grant agreement, and I think it is also explicitly linked in our event webpage. I hope the colleagues can confirm. If it's not yet the case, we will put it there. So that would be the guidance that we can offer on the wizard. And of course, we encourage everybody, in particular, if you are not so familiar with all the rules. So I'm just getting a sign that indeed this link to the guidance on the wizard is in the event webpage, and you can look at it. So again, we encourage everybody to, in particular, the ones among you who are not so experienced with participating in our programs and who don't know by heart all the personnel cost rules, that you rather go through this wizard when preparing your cost statements, and in particular, the personnel costs. Okay, next question. Do you need to have timesheets for people working full-time on the project?
So that's the case where there's an alternative to timesheet. If a person is, as we call, has fully dedicated and is working exclusively on the action, there is a possibility to use, in case of timesheet, a declaration of exclusive work on the action. You, however, need to be careful about the use of this declaration because you can only use one per reporting period. Ideally, it should cover the whole reporting period, but it can also cover a shorter period, but it has to be at least 1 full month, and it's a period which must be uninterrupted. So if you have somebody who's working at some moments exclusively on the action and other moments not exclusively in the action, our advice is really then to use timesheets.
Okay, next question. Could you use a yearly rate and a monthly rate for the same person in different years, using yearly rate for 2021, but monthly rate for the first months of 2022?
So these options that you have between monthly and hourly rate have to be used in a consistent manner for all your Horizon 2020 grants during a full financial year. So you could switch from one financial year to the other, but you have to do the same for all your grants in the Horizon 2020.
Okay, next one. Which personnel costs calculation method is preferable for an employee with full-time, half-time, and part-time effort?
I would say, well, maybe Surin, you have a view on this.
I can give a try. Thank you, Isabelle. So, which is preferable? That's really up to you, up to your usual accounting practices. I would say the less risky one is option 1. If we talk about so there are several methods of calculation of the personnel cost. If we talk only about the productive hours, obviously the less risky one is option 1, the fixed number 1,720. The second option, which is an individual calculation, is more detailed, more precise in the same time as well, but with some conditions. The third one is also more detailed, could be per cost category, so it's based on your usual cost accounting practices, should be applied consistently as well, and also has to fulfill certain conditions, among which the 90% condition, meaning that productive hours should be at least 90% of the number of workable hours. Now, if we talk about method of calculation of personnel cost, so we have either actual or monthly. This will depend really on your way, on your method. So as Isabel said previously, you have to have a method per financial year. Obviously, the annual one would be probably the easiest or the most straightforward. The monthly has some specificities, and also, even though could be seen as more precise, has some specificities to make a pro rata of the annual payments. And then we have as well, so this is between annual, monthly, and then we have as well actual individual method to calculate personnel cost and average personnel cost. So actual individual is a calculation of an hourly rate per person, and average personnel cost is a calculation of an hourly rate per cost category, per personnel cost category. So either one category could be, for example, engineers or a cost center and so on, according to your usual cost accounting practices. Thank you.
Next one, the timesheet is printed at the end of the period or end of the year. Then the employee and the supervisor sign every month with the same date.
If it's printed at the end of the reporting period, it's not clear to me how it can be signed at least monthly, but definitely the requirement is that it should be signed at least monthly. So
yes, indeed, I think if we understand it correctly, this practice would not be compliant.
Yeah, it doesn't seem.
So you must have a system of timesheets where it is possible that the person and the supervisor signs every month and not 12 times in December. Okay. How does the platform calculate for different non-working days legislations by countries? Again, questions on annual productive hours. Isabel.
For non-working days per country. So I think the platform, I'm not sure that's referring to the wizard, and I don't know how I must say I don't know how the wizard takes that into consideration. But for the applicable rules, the non-working days legislation by countries is maybe referring to holidays. Then this depends on the option that you took for your annual productive hours. If we're talking about an hourly rate per year, if you took the fixed option 1,720, there is no impact, so it will always be the same number, this 1,720. If you chose the second option for individual annual productive hours, then in the formula, when you are deducting the leave, that's part of the calculation per person of taking out these non-working days. And if you adopted the third option, which is the standard annual productive hours, then it depends on your usual practices and how the non-working days, according to your legislation and your usual practices, are taken into consideration in your standard annual productive hours.
Okay, I think this is again showing that the preferred option in the sense of avoiding errors is, of course, option 1, because then you don't have to care for all this. It's a fixed number, independent of any special conditions by country or by organization and so on. So in case of doubt, we encourage you just use option 1, 1720. Next question. Is it possible to identify the persons involved in reports as researcher 1, researcher 2, researcher 3, etc., without specifying names and surnames? I try to reply this myself because it's not so much linked to the cost reporting, but to the general reporting. So indeed, in Horizon 2020, there is no obligation in the reports that you send to us, in the periodic reports and final reports, to identify your collaborators personally by name. That's not an obligation in Horizon 2020. It will be different for you if you participate in Horizon Europe, because there we will ask for the identity of the researchers. Having said this, of course, if you become subject of an audit and the auditors come to your place, then of course the identity of researchers for which you have charged costs have to be revealed, because the auditors will also look into individual timesheets, into individual salary slips, and so on. Okay, so far on this one. Next question, is there a way to use the wizard tool before the period of the justification begins? I answer myself, unfortunately not for the moment. So we don't have a playground where you can check the wizard. So it is indeed linked to the opening of the periodic report in a reporting period. Next question, if our organization works with a fixed amount of yearly hours that is lower than 1720, should we use this value or keep the 1720? So again, a question on the three options and when to use which option. Isabelle.
So, well, you can always use the fixed option, option number 1, 1720. If you have a lower number of hours, it's not transparent in the question, but maybe you have a usual practice, and if you have this usual practice of using a lower number and according to your usual practices, that maybe you can use option 3 then, which is the standard number of annual productive hours. That must be your usual practice used in a consistent manner. And there is a second condition, which is that this lower number cannot be less than 90% of the annual workable hours. And this number of workable hours corresponds to the time that an employee must be working or at the disposal of the employee according to the legislation or collective labor agreement or employment contract. If your low number of annual productive hours according to your usual practices is lower than this 90%, then you would have to use this 90% of the workable annual hours.
Okay, next question. For a full month, the number of hours is 143.33, 1720 divided by 12. How to calculate a number of hours for employment, for example, from 11th to 31st of March?
Maybe I can jump in
yes.
for this one. So I think and there was a previous question as well, which was a little bit confusing, the number of hours worked on the project with the number of productive hours, which are used for the calculation of the hourly rate. So I think there should be no confusion. This is really important in the calculation of personnel cost. So the formula to calculate the personnel cost is personnel cost equal number of hours worked on the project multiplied by the so-called hourly rate. And the hourly rate itself is the personnel cost of the person divided by the productive hours. In this case, when we talk about the 1720 divided by 12 and 143 hours, it's basically the denominator, so the down part of the equation, which is used to calculate the hourly rate. This one will remain the same independently of how much the person works for the project. So the productive hours can only be affected in case of parental leave. If not, the productive hours should really remain the same for the calculation of the hourly rate throughout the year. If there is a monthly calculation, then the upper part of the equation, so the personnel cost, can change from one month to the other. But the down part, so the productive hours, should really remain the same independently of how much time is worked on the action. If a person works only from 11th to 31st of March, for example, on the action, then on his timesheet, he will declare the number of hours worked from 11th to 31st of March, which will be a number of hours. And the personnel cost to be declared for that month for the project will be the number of hours worked in the timesheet from 11th to 31st of March, let's assume 120 hours, which will be multiplied by the hourly rate of that month, which is the personal cost of the person of that month divided by 143 hours. Sorry, it's very mathematic and auditor's perspective maybe, but just to clarify that it's a big difference between the hours worked and what is foreseen also in the work contract and the real time claimed on the project. Maybe just to add as well that there could be fluctuations in the hours worked in the month, but there are some key controls, let's say, and conditions foreseen in the grant agreement, which are that the so-called double ceiling rule, which is that the number of hours claimed for a person for a year cannot be higher for the whole year compared to the number of productive hours used for the calculation of the hourly rate of that particular person, and also the personal cost used for the calculation of the hourly rate for that person for that year should not be higher than the actual personal cost booked in the accounts for that person for that year. Thank you.
Okay, next question. If there is no data available for the last completed financial year, for instance, if staff is hired in the running year, how to calculate the hourly rate? I think we had a very similar question already, but maybe you can reinforce the message again, Isabel.
So indeed, if it's the case of a person newly hired during the ongoing financial year, and this financial year is not closed, you will use the personal cost, so the data of the ongoing financial year for the months which of this ongoing year until the end of the reporting period, and you just have to be careful in your calculation that you adapt the number of the annual productive hours to the fact that you have only a portion of the year that was worked on, and so you make a prorata of the annual productive hours and you use the personal costs paid to this newly hired person in the ongoing financial year.
Okay. Next one, is it necessary to write in detail the description of tasks in timesheets? Maybe, Sorin, you can tell us what you would accept as an auditor in the level of detail.
What we see in practice is that, I mean, there could be, most often we see codes, for example, or work packages references, or that will finally be, of course, identifiable in the project. So we don't really see descriptions. I mean, there could be, of course, a description of the main task that the person carried out, but usually there are reference to the work packages foreseen in the grant agreement and in the Horizon 2020 project.
So the guidance, you should link the work to the work packages as described in the project. So if the work packages are described elsewhere, you don't have to repeat details in the timesheet. Next question, when the owner of an SME receives a salary and not dividends, is it not considered SME anymore? So I try to reply to this one myself. So this relates to the special option of charging a unit cost for SME owner managers who do not pay themselves or do not get from their company a salary and live from the dividends or from other means. For these one, indeed, there is a unit costs that is predefined and where these SME owners, managers can just charge the hours and multiply by this unit cost amount. If such an SME owner manager is at the same time an employee, has an employment contract with his or her own company, then it is considered for our purpose as any other employee, and they have to charge the real salary like any other employee and following the rules that were described in the last 1.5 hours. So the unit cost is only available for SME owner managers that do not get a salary from their company. Next one, if a staff member had a contract change with pay rise in the middle of the financial year, how should we do the calculation of the hourly rate for that year? Isabel, maybe?
So I mean, if the year is closed, you're just going to put all the remuneration for the calculation of the hourly rate for the top part, the numerator. You're going to put all the remuneration paid, so that will be including the rise. If it's we're in the case where the beneficiary has to use the last closed financial year for reporting on the costs of the ongoing of the last months of the reporting period, and if the raise happened in these months of the ongoing financial year, then the beneficiary would still have to use the hourly rate of the last closed financial year, which will not take into consideration the raise that happened in the following year. And so that's something to be taken into consideration when you are using an hourly rate calculated on a yearly basis. This is one of the reasons why the possibility to use the monthly hourly rate, that means the hourly rate calculated per month, has been introduced, because then you can reflect the raise from the moment it was introduced in the following months. But as explained previously in the presentation, please keep in mind that this is one of the advantages of using the monthly hourly rate. However, there is more complexity in the calculation, so you really have to think before choosing this option.
Okay, next one, personnel on Horizon Europe and Horizon 2020. We can't comply with the financial ceiling in H2020. The amount to be claimed for Horizon Europe is unknown when reporting H2020. How to solve that? I assume the question relates to somebody who works at the same time in a Horizon Europe grant and in a Horizon 2020 grant. Isabel.
So I understand that this is referring to the ceiling that we've explained at the Horizon 2020, notably the fact that you cannot declare more hours than that worked on the action than per person per year than the hours that you use to calculate the hourly rate. And then under Horizon Europe, there is also the similar type of ceiling, but which is adapted to the Horizon Europe rules, which is based not on an hourly rate, but on a daily rate. So it's a ceiling, which is a number of days, which is 215 days per person for all EU grants. So in practice, I think that for the person who is already working in the Horizon 2020, you may in your declaration already be careful about the rules of Horizon 2020. So not declaring more than the hours that you use for the calculation of the hourly rate. And then when you will be reporting under Horizon Europe, you will also have to check at the moment of reporting under Horizon Europe that you altogether you will not be declaring more than the Horizon Europe ceiling, which is 215 days for one person in all EU grants. And possibly to do this check, you may need to convert the hours that you worked in the Horizon 2020 into days, then to comply with the Horizon Europe part.
Okay. Next one, how to deal with the long-term sick leave of a staff on an ERC grant?
For ERC, the rules on personal cost, actual personal cost apply, as we have explained this morning. And sick leave, when you're using notably the fixed number of annual productive hours, sick leave is not something that you can deduct from this fixed number, so there is no impact. And then if you are, it won't change the fixed number of annual productive hours, 1,720. If you are using the individual annual productive hours, then leave is taken into consideration per person. So then that can be deducted.
Okay, next question. We have employees working in more than one H2020 project and other programs. Shall we indicate all the projects in the timesheet, including the non-H2020 ones?
Sorin, would you like to give a best practice?
So from an auditor's perspective, which is, as you know, okay, let's say inspired from the field and the audits we're carrying on, if you have the possibility and you have the time, the time recording system already done for the other projects as well, ideally would be to have everything in the timesheets, but the requirements, so the mandatory requirements are to have foresee that the timesheet should refer at least to Horizon 2020. So from an auditor's perspective, in order to, for your own internal checks as well, to ensure that you don't do double claim and so on, ideally would be to have all the projects that the person works on in the timesheet, but that's really entirely up to you. The requirement is for Horizon 2020 only.
Okay. Next one, does the total ceiling of 1720 apply to all Horizon 2020 EU grants within the organization? Or does it only for other funding streams? Within the organization only, or does other funding streams also need to be taken into account? Do other funding streams be taken into account?
So the ceilings concern the numbers per person per year in all EU grants. So it's not only Horizon 2020, but all the other EU grants, notably the directly managed grants.
And I would even go a bit further, Isabel. This is the part that is under our direct control, but we also have the general rules on non-profit, meaning if you charge more costs to other funding streams, that means in practice you make a profit, because with the 1720 already charged, you cover 100% of the personnel costs of a person. So that would be then a violation of the non-profit rules. So I would ask you to be very prudent with this. Next one, if the institution's usual practice is 1650 hours, does that have to be explicitly stated in employment contracts, or is it enough that it's usual practice? Maybe Sorin, no? But because you are checking these things.
Indeed, I'm not. Okay, I see now the question. Sorry, in Slido. So if the institutional usual practice is 1650, does that have to be explicitly? So I assume, so once again, now it depends on which option for calculating productive hours the beneficiary uses. If it's option 1, there is no, we will not check further. So this is to be used by default. If it's option 2 or 3, these calculations are, there are some conditions to use option 2 and 3. One of them, so what we will check is the upper part of the calculation of productive hours, which is that the workable hours used for the calculation are in line with the work contracts and working arrangements which are applicable to the employee and to the organization, of course. So meaning that, let's assume in this case, the beneficiary is using option 3 to calculate productive hours. He will have to provide us the calculation during the audit and before the audit and also during the audit, the calculation. And in the calculation, we will have a number of so-called workable hours, so how many hours a person can work, and then some deductions in order to arrive to the number of productive hours. We will have to check first the conditions so that the number of productive hours is at least 90% of the total workable hours. But to answer also to this question, and also that this method is used consistently and it's a usual practice of the beneficiary. But to directly answer to the question, the upper part of this calculation, which refers to the number of workable hours, in order to calculate this, we will have to check with the applicable work contract, for example, and applicable legal provisions like the work code or other applicable legal requirements at the level of the entity. That indeed this 1,650 hours is the number of hours foreseen in the work contracts minus, let's say, the applicable number of holidays and so on. So yes, we do check. To directly reply to the question, is it enough that this is usual practice? No, it's not enough. We will check indeed that the number of workable hours that you use in the calculation stems from the applicable legal provisions in terms of work contracts and national legal requirements.
Okay, next one. Why does the timesheet template show 6 months when you have to print and sign it every month? paper waste. So this template that we provide is just a suggestion. It is for illustrating the minimum requirements that such a timesheet has to fulfill. Nobody is forced or obliged to use it. And of course, you can change this. If you use this template, you can change it and print only a version that contains 1 month for the signature. Next one is the 1720 annual productive hours based on 1 full-time equivalent equals 40 hours a week working and being paid for 40 hours. I think it shows again a misunderstanding, but Isabel will clarify.
So the option for the annual productive hours, which is the fixed number 1720, applies across the board, irrespective of what is the working time or you're in the contract. So you will be using the 1720 differently. So that's for the calculation, how to determine your hourly rate. Then you're going to multiply your hourly rate by the number of hours actually worked on the action as reflected in your timesheet. And there you have to reflect the reality of what was worked on the action.
Okay, next one. Can we declare the costs associated with the work of a doctoral student in the context of a Horizon 2020 project?
So there is indeed a possibility for PhD or doctoral students to work to be declared, but there are some conditions, notably that the contract that you have with the agreement or contract that you have with a student is work oriented, so not training oriented, because we need the cost to be associated to work done on the action. And the objective of the action is work, is not, I mean, in this case, training of the student. Then it has to be in accordance with national legislation, notably labor legislation, and that the allocation of tasks is also in line to the student, is complying with the national legislation. Then in practice, as this is not an employment contract, it will be under the category of a direct would be under the category of a direct contract other than an employment contract directly between the person, so the student, and the beneficiary.
Next question. Will the video stream be available after the webinar? Yes, absolutely, for sure. It will be available on the same event webpage, on the same place, but also directly on YouTube, on the channel of the Research and Innovation Directorate General of the European Commission. So you find it, and it will be there. Next question. If the person is hired in November 21 and the project ends in May 22, how should I calculate the hourly rate? Can we use 1720? So
indeed, so basically you have to keep in mind that you can always use 1720 as a basis. Then so that's the option. That's there's no condition to use it, so you can always use this number for your annual productive hours. So the person will be hired in 2021. I will assume in this case that in May 2022 the financial year of the beneficiary would not be finished, so it would be the case where you would need to use for the months of from January to May 2022, the hourly rate that you had calculated for the last closed financial year, which was the 2021. And then this hourly rate, you would, for 2021, you would multiply it by the hours worked on the action in November and December. And for 2023, by the hours worked on the action from January to May.
Okay, next question. In the case of SME owners without a salary, what are the documents that need to be stored in case of an audit? I guess just the timesheets.
Indeed. So for the SME owners without a salary, they will have to pay to claim in the financial statements, to declare in the financial statements an hourly rate which is based on the foreseen hourly rate, which are based on Marie Skłodowska-Curie hourly rates. What remains to be checked, let's say, in case of an audit, is indeed the quantity used. So the price is there, let's say the hourly rate, the equivalent of the price. The quantity will have to be checked indeed during an audit, meaning the timesheets and reliability of timesheets as well, of course.
And maybe in addition, there might also be technical reviews. So you will also need to have documentation on what actually was done. So publications, lab books, minutes of project meetings showing that the person actually worked on the project, but not the amount in euros of the hourly rate, because this is fixed and doesn't have to be checked. Next one.
Eventually,
yes,
also for travel cost, yeah, sorry, Peter, for travel cost as well, eventually the supporting documents which will justify, of course, travel cost or subcontracting cost. So it really depends. The answer was only for personal cost. Thank you.
Next one, when working on more than one H2020 project, the total number of hours worked on the projects cannot exceed 7020. Is that correct?
So that's if you depends on the option that you chose for your annual productive hours. If you chose 1720, then indeed you cannot declare for the person for that year in all EU grants more than 1720. If you are using one of the two other options and that this amounts to another number, you will have to use this other number as the ceiling per person per year for all EU grants.
And maybe to illustrate again why this is the case, it is simply because if you charge more than 1720, you would make a profit. Because this whole formula consists of two factors. One is the number of hours actually worked, and the other one is the hourly rate. And if you divide 1720 by 1720, you get 1, and 1 time your full salary is the maximum you can charge. Okay, next. If a given employee works with a contract that determines that the hours worked by week are 40, can we use the 1720 formula even with this case? Thank you.
Yes, so I will underline again that in all cases you can use for annual productive hours 1720, and if your real hours, including what is reflected in your contract, is different, it doesn't prevent you, for the purpose of declaring personal cost under Horizon 2020, from using the option 1, the fixed number of annual productive hours, 1720.
Only what should be paid attention to is that you should check the double ceiling at the end of the year, because if the persons work fully on the project and 40 hours a week, there is a chance that the number of hours worked for the project will be bigger than 1720, in which case you have to limit the cost claimed only to, you have to calculate the hourly rate only on 1720 hours.
Okay, next question. If there is a difference in the calculation method of the EU platform and how the salary is calculated per country, what happens with the deviation?
So I understand that the platform is the wizard. I mean, if it's a simple calculation there and there's nothing very specific, then I think the wizard should be trusted. If you are in something very complex with the most difficult options and notably project-based remuneration, maybe this is something that you would have to check, possibly by sending a question to the Research Inquiry Service, or maybe, I don't know, maybe reflecting this with a project officer. But for the very specific details and non-common cases, I think that there may be safer to ask for confirmation.
If I can also quickly jump in, so when using the wizard, you will need to input data, like for example, personal cost of that person, and this data, of course, should be in line with what you have in the accounting for that person. So if there is only an issue of the so the wizard will help you to have the calculation for the project based on the number of these different input that you introduce. But of course, you will have to double check, of course, that the input you provide, you will include in the wizard, are indeed in line with the cost booked in the accounting. Thank you.
Yes, and maybe to reinforce what Isabel has said, if you have a very particular issue with this, it is the best that you go to the research inquiry service on our portal, which is under the menu item support and guidance, and you ask these questions with the concrete details, and you will receive a detailed reply to your particular issue. Because our general rule is that we accept the usual accounting practice of organizations, which also means the national rules that apply in the different countries. Next question: if a person changes the contractual hours between full-time, half-time several times during the year, how do you calculate this in relation to the 1720 rule? Now,
well, maybe Sorin can complete the answer, but I mean, definitely if you're using 1720, you would have to make a prorata of during the full financial year, how many, 1%, right? What corresponds to the percentage that the person worked compared to a full-time employee. And then that would be the way to prorate this 1720. In practice, you would have to do it then, I understand, depending on the amount of months the person worked full-time, and then for the part-time parts, but arrived at 1% corresponding, I mean, applies this percentage for the full year.
Thank you, Isabel. So indeed, nothing to add when calculating the hourly rate based on 1720 on a half-time. Then we have to use half of 1720, obviously, for that period. So, yeah, thank you.
Next one, can you precise what kind of absences should we deduct from the 1720 hours to get the number of productive hours? Sick leave, maternity leave, holidays, etc. I think it shows again an important misunderstanding. So please, Isabel, clarify.
So for the option 1 for your annual productive hours, which is the fixed number 1720, you can't deduct anything else than parental leave. So in terms of leave, the only thing that you deduct is parental leave. No sick leave, no holidays are deducted from this fixed number 1720. It's different in the two other options for the annual productive hours.
Okay, next question. Thank you for the talk. To make once in each full financial year, do you need to show every month in detail? Can you show an example? I'm not sure whether I fully understand. Can you help me, Isabel and Sorin?
It's not very obvious. If the person is using the calculation of a hourly rate per month, then you have to do the calculation per month. I don't know if Sorin, it's more
So maybe if this refers to a case, or most probably if this refers to a case of for an audit, you will have to provide, yes, indeed, all the details of the calculations you used for each particular person. We will either select a sample or we'll extend our sample, but anyway, we'll ask you all these details for the checks on the spot, and also to plan the audit before. But in general, you will have to, so if you have an annual calculation, then even if the calculation is annual, you will have details which will be monthly, for example. The payslips will be monthly, the timesheets will be monthly, so we will need all the information you have regarding that calculation. First of all, we'll ask, for example, what we call a breakdown of cost, in which you will detail how you calculate the cost of each particular person. And then behind that, we'll ask you as well the related supporting documents, which are, some of them are annual, some of them are monthly. For example, the work contract will be only one, and there could be some amendments. So I'm not sure if I replied directly to the question, but in practice, this is what we will ask during an audit, meaning all the necessary details to to assess that the cost is indeed eligible in line with the cost with the cost accounting practices of the beneficiary, and also with the costs that have been booked in the accounting of the beneficiary. So yes, we'll ask all the details.
Okay, next one. If all employees are working exclusively for the project, do we still need to calculate hourly rate or hours worked for personnel costs?
The answer would be yes. Or please, Isabel.
Yeah, definitely. So the whether the person works exclusively, or all the people on the action works exclusively or not exclusively on the action, it doesn't change the way you're going to calculate. You need to calculate your hourly rate, and then you have to multiply it by the hours worked on the action. The only difference is that the type of document that we will request to justify the number of hours actually worked on the action. When it's the case of a person exclusively working on the action, instead of being timesheet, it can be this declaration for exclusive work. But it does not change the way you calculate the personal costs.
The amount of the leasing rate. Isabel.
Sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of the how to declare
for leasing equipment.
Okay, so then now we're not talking about personal cost. We're talking about equipment. So the default rule for declaration to declare cost for equipments are the depreciation costs, and under the declaration of depreciation costs, there can be costs for leasing an equipment, but one of the conditions is that it's not more than it would have costed if you were depreciating an equipment that you had purchased. And Sorin, if you want to complete the answer.
Yes, indeed. So here, what will be eligible, what we can calculate as being, what you should calculate when you declare the cost as being eligible for a leased asset is to calculate based on the value, on the acquisition value, so the theoretical acquisition value, because the asset is not acquired by yourself, what would have costed depreciation, the equivalent of the depreciation for that year. Of course, to use as well a coefficient of use for the Horizon 2020 project in order to declare an amount that would be eligible. You know that in the leasing cost, you have as well, you may have other type of costs like services, insurances, or insurance, or as well you may have VAT or non-deductible VAT. So and also you may have the so-called
financing.
Okay, financing costs, indeed. That should be taken out. So as a best practice, you would probably take the acquisition value, so the cost, the real cost of the asset, and based on your usual cost accounting practices, you may calculate the equivalent depreciation that you may claim on the action, by always not forgetting to take into account, of course, the coefficient of use on the project, meaning how much time or how many pieces, or how do you use the proportion of the use, how do you calculate, of course, the proportion of use of that asset on the action, on the Horizon 2020 action.
Okay, next question. Double ceiling staff with 50% position in the project cannot claim more than 860 hours, right?
So I understand that for that person who would be using their fixed number of annual productive hours 1720, so that's 50% of this number. So indeed, that would establish the ceiling that you would use. So you would not be able to declare more than 860 hours for that person for that year in all EU grants.
Okay, next one. What are unit costs? Platforms costs may appear in unit costs or invoices. So unit costs in very general terms are one form of a proxy for real costs. And it means that not the real costs of each individual event or unit are charged, but we define, or you define in advance, a cost per unit, and these units can be very different. So one example for the unit costs are the SME owner manager unit costs that we spoke about already, meaning that we have a predefined cost per hour, hourly rate that is used by these SME owner managers not paying themselves a salary. And the only evidence that you have then to provide is the number of units that you delivered. And for calculating the overall costs, you multiply the cost per unit, the predefined cost per unit, by the number of units actually delivered. So one example is this SME owner manager, that would be in the personnel costs. But your question seems also to hint to another form of unit cost that we have in Horizon 2020, which is the unit costs for internal invoicing of services or goods that are supplied within your organization. So, for instance, if you have as a big installation in your organization, let's say a big accelerator, and for your project you need beam time to, to do whatever, then you have the possibility, if this is the standard practice in your organization, to charge this, let's say, by hour or minute of beam time that you use, with a predefined unit that is calculated by a method that is specific to your organization. So these are the examples that come to my mind immediately. So you have a predefined cost per unit, and then you just have to justify within your grant the number of units used, because the predefined cost per unit is already there. I don't know, Isabel, Sorin, do you want to?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just to precise also the fact that the second type of unit cost that you mentioned, Peter, indeed should also represent actual costs. So they are calculated based on the cost of the whole infrastructure, like in this case, the whole platform. And in order to calculate this unit cost per platform, you will use the actual cost of the platform, the eligible actual cost of the platform, and the total number of units used for that platform. And I can also think of, for example, the large research infrastructure as well, which may use a unit cost calculation in addition to the internal invoices. Yeah, please, Isabel.
And for the the unit cost for internal invoices, it must also be in line with the usual cost accounting practices.
Next question. At the end of the presentation, will it be possible to have all the questions and answers of today accessible somewhere on your internet website? Yes, it will be accessible within this video that we make available on our channel on YouTube. We will not transcribe this into written replies. If you are interested, you just scroll through the video presentation and can jump from one question and answer to the next.
Could I just?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Just wanted to point out that actually many of the answers that we are providing today are written in the annotated model grant agreement. So there are some parts for which we are explaining more, but there's really a lot of content available in the annotated model grant agreement.
Next one, can self-employed SME owners participate in role as personnel? How to calculate hourly rate in these cases? I think we replied somehow. So if the SME owner is at the same time an employee and has a salary that is, of course, properly documented in the accounts of the company, then they can charge personnel costs in the same way as any other employee. But I see here the word self-employed, so that might be a one-person company. And here, maybe Sorin and Isabel, you can give more specific reply.
Well, to be able to apply the SME owner unit cost, you have to have the status of an SME, and it also applies this unit cost for SME owners not receiving a salary if the SME is the beneficiary in the action. If the person there, self-employed, is a natural person and participating in the action as a natural person, actually we will also apply the unit cost for SME owners without a salary. And then if this person self-employed is then working for a beneficiary, then we have to see if it may fall under the category of a direct contract with a beneficiary, but then this is less likely unless the legal form of the company itself of the person has no legal personality, and that in fact the contract is between the person working and the beneficiary.
Next one, if the number of hours worked written in the employment contract is 1827 hours per year, can we use the calculation base 1720? I think we should repeat and repeat and repeat here. Yes, 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 the 1720 is always available. It is the standard option and we encourage its use. Next one, for third parties providing in-kind contribution against payment, shall the third party provide timesheets for the personnel? So
when we are considering this personnel has been seconded to a beneficiary. So the person is still employed by the third party, but at the disposal of the beneficiary. So normally the timesheet, the person should be working for the beneficiary. I understand that the beneficiary should be handling the timesheets of this person, because in practice, the person is at the disposal of the beneficiary and working for the beneficiary.
Okay, the next one somehow also related. External researchers from another university work on our project. The special type of personnel contract, 10 hours per week. Is it enough to sign the declaration?
Well, there seems to be several dimensions in there. So the person that's here is taking the angle of how to record the personal costs. It's unlikely that a person with a 10 hours per week contract can be considered as working exclusively on the action, unless it would be the only time that this person works. So I would say that it doesn't look like an exclusive work on the action. And then there is still have to be careful under what status this external researcher from the other university is working on the project. So you'd have to see under which, if it can fall under one of the categories for personal costs. But I would not say from first view that it could be exclusive dedication, and it could not be a possibility to use the declaration. In case of doubt, I think it's safer to use the timesheet.
Okay. Next one, the wizard asks for employment end date. What do you have to include when there is no end date? Unfortunately, we don't have the technical expert with us today. Do you know, Isabel or Sorin?
I assume nothing, but yeah.
We're here today on the technical details, but my suggestion would be, if there is no option to say nothing, you put a date that is beyond the end of your project, possibly the date of retirement of that person, to be on the safe side. Okay, I'm afraid we are reaching the end of our session, and unfortunately, I cannot stay longer today. We have a few questions with low number of votes left. We will, of course, go through all them afterwards and see whether there are any that we should use for reinforcing our guidance, FAQs, annotated grant agreement, and so on. But otherwise, I would stop here now. And thank you all for the interesting questions. It was a lively discussion. Of course, I thank in particular our two speakers and the colleague who helped us replying to the questions. So thank you very much for all your contributions and for your interest. And see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.